Wait, this audit showing funds tied to Daniel Cole. Are we saying this was intentional manipulation from the start, or something worse unfolding?
The entire company now belongs to Ethan Cole. My brother shot up from his chair so fast it slammed into the courtroom floor, and my mother actually grabbed the table, like she was about to collapse. 2 minutes earlier, she'd been smirking at me from across the aisle at my grandfather's while reading, still wearing the black funeral dress she wore when she told me I wouldn't get a single dollar. I was the forgotten son. Daniel was the future surgeon, the golden child, the one she said would carry the family name. Then Grandpa's lawyer opened the final sealed letter and looked directly at me. Not my brother.
Me.
The room went dead silent as he adjusted his glasses and said, "Your grandfather spent 20 years preparing you for this moment." And that's when my mother whispered something I never thought I'd hear in my life. "What did your grandfather tell you?" I honestly didn't know how to answer her, because until that second, I thought my grandfather had spent most of my life disappointed in me too. Daniel stared at me across the courtroom like I'd pulled off some kind of scam. His face had gone pale red, the vein near his temple twitching hard enough to see from 20 feet away. "No," he said under his breath. "No, this is wrong." But the lawyer, Harold Bennett, didn't even look at him. He just opened another folder calmly while the entire courtroom started murmuring. And I mean everyone. My cousins. My grandfather's business partners. People who'd spent my entire life pretending I barely existed unless Daniel wasn't in the room. My mother suddenly stood up. "There has to be some mistake," she snapped. "Daniel is the eldest son. He's been involved in this family from the beginning." Harold finally looked up. "Mrs. Cole," he said evenly, "your father made his intentions very clear. The thing is, my mother had been certain about today. Absolutely certain. The night before the funeral reception ended, she cornered me near the parking lot while Daniel was shaking hands with hospital executives. She looked me dead in the eye and said, 'Your brother sacrificed his life for this family. You disappeared to Chicago and played with spreadsheets. Don't embarrass yourself tomorrow fighting for something that was never meant for you.' I remembered just standing there holding my car keys, too stunned to even argue. Because part of me believed her. That was the worst part. Growing up, Daniel got everything before he even had to ask. When he got into med school, my mother threw a $70,000 celebration party. When I graduated college, she mailed me a text message that said, 'Congrats. Proud of you.' That was it. Daniel got the beach house in Malibu after his wedding. Daniel got introduced at every family event as the future of the Cole legacy. Daniel got my grandfather's watch before Grandpa was even dead. Meanwhile, I got asked why I wasn't more ambitious. And standing there in that courtroom, watching my mother panic for the first time in my entire life, I realized something wasn't adding up. Because Harold Bennett wasn't acting surprised. Not even slightly. He looked prepared. Like this entire moment had been planned years ago. Then Daniel slammed both hands onto the table and pointed directly at me. "He manipulated Grandpa," he said loudly. "That's what this is." He got into his head near the end. Several people in the courtroom immediately started whispering again. My stomach dropped, because for one horrible second, I thought maybe they'd believe him. But Harold slowly reached into the folder beside him and said, "Actually, Mr. Cole, the records show your grandfather began preparing Ethan 15 years ago." And that's when my mother stopped breathing long enough to whisper. 15 years. Daniel looked like somebody had punched him in the chest. "Preparing him for what?" he demanded. But Harold ignored the question completely. Instead, he removed a stack of old documents bound together with faded blue tabs and placed them carefully on the table like they were evidence in a criminal trial. "These," he said, "are meeting logs personally kept by your grandfather." I frowned immediately, because I recognized the handwriting. Every page was filled with Grandpa's sharp block letters, dates, locations, notes, initials. Harold flipped one toward the judge. "Summer of 2011, he read aloud. "Financial review session with Ethan. For hours." Another page. "Winter of 2013. Corporate liability analysis." Another. 2016, succession discussion postponed. Ethan not yet ready. The room went completely still. I could actually hear papers rustling behind me. Daniel laughed once, but it sounded forced. This proves nothing. Harold calmly adjusted his glasses. It proves your grandfather met privately with Ethan Cole for nearly 2 decades without informing the rest of the family. My mother looked physically sick now. No, she said quietly. No, he wouldn't do that. But deep down, I think she already knew he would. Because suddenly memories I hadn't thought about in years started hitting me all at once. Grandpa teaching me how to read balance sheets at 16 while Daniel was away at a prep school conference. Grandpa making me explain investment reports at dinner while everyone else talked over me. Grandpa once telling me, most people confuse confidence with competence. At the time, I thought he was just giving random old man lectures. I never imagined he was evaluating me. Harold opened another folder. This next section, he said carefully, concerns the Cole family holding company. That got everyone's attention instantly. Even the judge looked up. Because most people in that courtroom thought the family fortune came from real estate and hospital investments. But the holding company? That was the real empire. Private equity, medical properties, shipping interests, commercial acquisitions. Hundreds of millions of dollars hidden behind layers of corporate entities. And Daniel had spent years acting like it already belonged to him. I was my father's successor. My mother snapped suddenly. Daniel was supposed to take over after me. Harold turned toward her slowly. With respect, Mrs. Cole, your father specifically documented why that could never happen. Daniel stood up again. You don't get to destroy my reputation with secret paperwork. His voice echoed hard enough that 2 people near the back flinched. Then Harold said the sentence that changed the atmosphere in the courtroom completely. Your grandfather began investigating unauthorized financial losses connected to Daniel Cole in 2018. Silence. Pure silence. Daniel froze. My mother looked at him instantly, not confused, terrified. And that was the exact moment I realized something much bigger than favoritism had been hidden from me this entire time. Then Harold reached for a sealed envelope marked confidential and said, the board testimonies will now be entered into record. The words entered into record didn't just land in the courtroom. They detonated it. A clerk immediately stepped forward with shaking hands, plugging a drive into the courtroom system. The projector behind the judge flickered to life. My mother turned sharply toward Harold. No board testimonies were supposed to be part of this reading, she said, voice rising. Harold didn't even look at her. That was before your father's final amendment, he replied. Daniel leaned over the table, whispering urgently to my mother now. This is a setup, he said. Someone is trying to rewrite everything. But then the first video began. An older man in a suit, one of the Cole Holding Company directors, appeared on screen. I'm confirming under oath, the man said, that Daniel Cole bypassed the Internal Risk Committee on 3 separate acquisitions, all of which resulted in undisclosed losses. A ripple went through the courtroom. My stomach tightened, because I had never heard any of this before. The video cut to another executive, then another, each one saying the same thing in different words. Pressure, overrides, hidden losses, falsified optimism reports. Daniel's face started to change. Not just angry now. Panicked. This is nonsense, he said loudly. They were incompetent. All of them. But Harold finally looked at him directly. Then, why did your grandfather remove you from all financial oversight 2 years before his death? That question hit harder than anything else. Even my mother went silent. 2 years before Grandpa died, Daniel had told the entire family he was transitioning into executive leadership. We celebrated it. There was a dinner, a speech, a toast. I remember sitting at the far end of the table, clapping politely while no one looked at me. And now I was hearing that Grandpa had quietly pulled him out of power long before any of us were told. The next video started. This time, it wasn't an executive. It was a handwritten audit summary projected onto the screen. And, at the bottom of it, my grandfather's signature. Clear. Sharp. Final. Harold read it out slowly. Daniel Cole demonstrates consistent prioritization of image over accountability. Daniel slammed his hand onto the table. Stop this. But no one reacted anymore. Not the judge. Not the clerk. Not even my mother. Because something had shifted. The room wasn't listening to Daniel now. It was watching him. Harold closed the laptop screen for a moment and said quietly, "There is one final component of your grandfather's directive before we proceed to inheritance distribution."
He paused.
And, for the first time, he looked directly at me again. Not Daniel.
Me.
My throat went dry. Because whatever came next, I had a feeling it wasn't just about money anymore. Harold opened the last sealed folder and said, "Ethan Cole, your grandfather left specific instructions that only you are permitted to hear the final condition of the will." My mother whispered my name like she didn't recognize it anymore. And Daniel slowly turned his head toward me like he was finally seeing me clearly for the first time in his life. The room didn't move. Not a single cough. Not a chair shifting. Even the air felt held in place. My name hanging in that courtroom, spoken like it meant something, didn't feel real. "Only you are permitted," Harold repeated, slower this time, as if making sure the entire room understood the weight of it. My mother stood up halfway. "No," she said immediately. "That's not acceptable. If there's a final condition, it applies to the whole family." Harold finally closed the folder. "It doesn't." That one sentence made her sit back down like her legs had given out. Daniel turned fully toward me now. And for the first time in my life, there was no arrogance in his face. No performance. Just confusion and something worse. Fear that he didn't understand what was happening. "What did you do?" he said quietly. I didn't answer him, because I didn't know what I was supposed to have done. Harold stepped away from the table and walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom, as if shifting the entire focus onto me was intentional. "Ethan Cole," he said, "your grandfather made it explicitly clear that you were never to be informed of this condition until the exact moment of execution." Execution. That word hit wrong. I felt my pulse spike instantly. My mother let out a short, broken laugh. "This is insane," she muttered. "He's been manipulated. All of this is some kind of—" But Harold raised a hand, cutting her off. "No one manipulated your father," he said sharply. "He anticipated you." That shut her up. For the first time, Harold turned slightly and activated a second document on the screen. Not financial records. Not testimonies. A scanned letter. My grandfather's handwriting filled the screen. Dense, deliberate, unmistakably his. Harold began to read. "If you are hearing this, then my assumptions were correct. My family will not agree on what they believe they deserve." My stomach tightened. That line felt personal. Like he wasn't talking about wealth. He was talking about us. Harold continued. "Ethan, you were never chosen by accident. You were observed, tested, and protected from influence you were too young to recognize at the time." My breath caught. Tested. That word echoed. Because suddenly every strange moment with Grandpa started resurfacing in fragments. The questions he asked me when no one was listening, the documents he gave me just to review, the conversations Daniel was never included in. My mother's voice broke through suddenly. "What tests?" she demanded. He was a child. Harold didn't look at her. "He started as a child," he said. The courtroom went cold again. Then he turned the page. And what came next made even Daniel stop breathing completely. "The final condition of my estate is not inheritance. It is confirmation." I looked up slowly. "Confirmation of what?" I asked, my voice barely coming out. Harold paused, then said the words that changed everything. "Whether Ethan Cole would choose truth, even when it destroys what his family believes about him." My mother froze. Daniel's jaw tightened. And I realized in that instant, whatever Grandpa had left behind, it wasn't just money. It was something that would force me to decide what kind of son I actually was. Harold reached for the final page and said quietly, "Before we proceed, there is one event your grandfather instructed must be revealed in full." Harold didn't turn the page immediately. He just held it, like he was waiting for the room to catch up to what had already been decided years ago. Then he spoke again. "This event occurred 3 years before your grandfather's death." My mother leaned forward sharply. "Stop dragging this out," she snapped. "Just say it." Harold finally looked at her. "I intend to." He lowered his gaze to the document, and the entire courtroom seemed to tighten at once. Then he said it. An internal audit revealed that a portion of the Cole Holding Company funds had been redirected into private accounts linked to Daniel Cole. Daniel's face changed instantly. That's not. Harold didn't let him finish. A pattern consistent with misrepresentation of asset performance and unauthorized restructuring of ownership influence. The words weren't emotional. They were surgical, precise, and that made them worse. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly behind her. "You're accusing my son of theft," she said, voice breaking into disbelief. "In open court?" Harold answered calmly. "I am reading your father's findings." Silence hit again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was fracture. Daniel looked around the room like he was searching for someone to reject it. "No one believes this," he said quickly. "This is selective information. Where are the full records?" Harold finally did something unexpected. He nodded. "As requested," he said. Then he pressed a button. A second set of files appeared on screen. Line after line of financial tracing, account movements, shell entities, delayed disclosures, and then a signature verification log, all tied back to Daniel. The courtroom began to murmur again, louder now. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. This wasn't just accusation anymore. This was structure. Evidence built over time. My mother suddenly turned toward me. "You knew," she said sharply. I blinked. "What?" "You've been working in finance," she said, voice rising. "You must have known what he was doing. You've been close to Grandpa's work." I didn't know any of this. I cut in immediately. And I meant it. That was the terrifying part. I hadn't been part of any of it. Not the accusations. Not the secrets. Not even the family's belief that I didn't matter. Harold closed the file again. And the silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. Then he said, "Your grandfather did not expose this during his lifetime for one reason only." He paused. Every eye in the room locked onto him, including mine. Then he finished. Because he was waiting to see whether Daniel Cole would correct it or continue it. Daniel swallowed hard. For the first time, he didn't have a response. My mother sat back down slowly, like her body had stopped trusting her. And I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about judgment. Harold turned the page again and said quietly, "Now we reach the final directive." He looked at me and added, "Ethan, this is where your grandfather's real plan begins." Harold let the words hang in the air. "Now we reach the final directive." The projector dimmed automatically, like the system itself was preparing for something different. Not evidence anymore. A decision. Harold opened the last envelope, thicker than the others, sealed with a dark wax stamp bearing my grandfather's initials. For the first time in the entire trial, he didn't read immediately. Instead, he looked at me. Not Daniel. Not my mother. Just me. Then he said quietly, "Your grandfather required that this portion only be executed if all prior findings were acknowledged on record." The judge nodded once. The clerk confirmed it. My mother's hands tightened around the edge of the bench. Daniel leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "This is a performance," he said. "It's designed to humiliate me." Harold finally broke the seal. "No," he replied. "It's designed to remove uncertainty." He unfolded the letter and began reading. "To my family, if you are hearing this final directive, then you have already seen what I feared most. Not failure, but denial." My throat tightened. Harold continued, "Ethan was not chosen to inherit because he is kind, or obedient, or distant from conflict." A pause. Then the line that made the room shift again. "He was chosen because he does not confuse love with entitlement." My mother let out a small, broken sound, half protest, half disbelief. Harold went on. "The Cole Holding Company shall not be transferred as a gift. It shall be transferred as a burden of proof." Daniel's head snapped up instantly. "What does that mean?" he demanded. Harold answered without hesitation. "It means ownership is conditional." The courtroom stirred again. Harold turned slightly toward the judge, then continued reading. "Ethan Cole will assume full controlling authority only under 3 conditions." He raised one finger. "First, all prior financial irregularities, must be formally acknowledged by Daniel Cole under oath. Daniel laughed sharply.
No.
But no one laughed with him. Harold raised a second finger. Second, Vivian Cole must relinquish all informal influence over company governance immediately and permanently. My mother froze.
Her face drained.
And then the third finger. Third, Ethan must agree to take responsibility for restoring the company, not preserving the family narrative. Silence. Absolute silence. Because that last condition wasn't about money.
It was about identity.
Harold lowered his hand and looked at me again. Your grandfather wrote one final instruction, he said. Then he read it. If Ethan refuses, distribute everything equally and dissolve the holding structure within 5 years. My stomach dropped. That wasn't inheritance. That was a trigger. A controlled collapse. Daniel suddenly stood. This is insane, he shouted. You're threatening the entire family empire over some moral experiment? Harold didn't react, because the next line mattered more. He turned back to the document. And read the final sentence. Because only one of my grandsons will protect what this family built, and the other will consume it. The courtroom didn't move.
Not even my mother spoke now.
All eyes slowly shifted toward me, because suddenly, I wasn't the ignored son anymore. I was the decision point. Harold closed the letter and said quietly, Ethan Cole, do you accept the conditions of final succession? And for the first time in my life, the entire weight of my family wasn't resting on what I had inherited. It was resting on what I was about to choose.
Some families think inheritance ends at money, but when hidden evaluations quietly decide leadership across generations, how many real-world institutions are being shaped without anyone noticing today?